This is Paul Levy, author of the book Digital Inferno. A word that you'll hear throughout your day, whether you're online or offline, whether you're at work or at home, at some point you're going to hear the word creativity. I hear it almost every day on the radio. I certainly see it on social media, platforms like LinkedIn. How to enhance your creativity, how to be more happy by being more creative. Put some creativity into your life. Creativity tools and techniques. Now, if I sound irritated, I don't mean to. I'm just keen to share with you the idea that creativity could be a blind alley for the very thing that you're seeking. The word itself suggests an outward form of creativity. It's about tools, it's about doing stuff. You'll open magazines, how to be more creative, and there'll nearly always be a top 10 ways to be more creative. And they're things for you to do. They're outward things for you to try. It can be anything from brainstorming to mind mapping to even just calm meditation. It can be about thinking out of the box. It can be about going from your right brain to your left brain and back again, where it's presented that your left brain is more rational and your right brain is more intuitive and creative. And you'll see words attached to it like building a vision for your life or for your business, and particularly around words like innovation. And at the heart of all these is this idea that you need to be more creative, but what's actually presented to you is to do more creative. Now, there is definitely a benefit from doing creativity, and particularly if you don't over-rationalize it. So actually, and that's the paradox, that you use tools and techniques in too much of a rational, limiting way, defeating the whole idea of creativity itself. Some of these tools and techniques can enhance, boost, or awaken the creative part of you that might be lying in slumber. And so brainstorming, when we go around in a group, or just you take a pad and a pen and you just come up with as many ideas and don't judge them too much, can suddenly get you in a place of flow. Now, I've used that word because that's another word that you'll find out there, that somehow we're blocked and we'd like to flow more in our lives, in our jobs, and so on. You'll also find the phrase problem solving, where everything that you want to get done that's difficult is framed as a problem, a how-to statement, and you use creative tools and techniques to get flow going and somehow solve a problem. Now, all of these things work to a more or lesser an extent, and practicing them can make you feel more creative. I think what concerns me as somebody now just have reached my age of 53 is that a lot of the people I've been able to do a longitudinal study with, including myself, but certainly hundreds and hundreds of people that I've worked with as a facilitator in coaching, don't actually seem in the long run to benefit too much from creative tools and techniques, from the outward form of creativity. And one of the reasons for that is that life itself presents us as a place of advocating what we're doing next, of sharing our problems, and this happens a lot online in status messages, and then what people offer us back is advice, and we feel we're being creative. We're in a very kind of rational problem solving state, and we have moments of flow, but in the long run we still seem to be in the same place with the same problems. Now, the reason for that, I think, is that a lot of the issues and questions are more to do with something a bit deeper down, to do with the mystery of being alive, to do with the undefinable parts of ourselves that are supposed to be mysterious. They're part of the human endeavour of trying to make sense of who we are. And the irony is, when we try to make sense of something, we can become sensible. That gets confused with rational. And then what happens is we look to be more creative through problem solving, which is all about cause and effect, and if I do this then that will happen and that will solve this. And on the surface we can make material improvements and changes and even experience a feeling of creativity, but if there are deeper down, not even causes but just processes happening in our subconscious, and just things that move at a slower pace and only get revealed to us over our whole biography, our life, part of who we are, that might come from our heredity, might come from how we were socialized, and might just be about our uniqueness. because we all are very different from each other. And even when we seem to overlap, suddenly something unique to us will show itself in a social situation. If those processes are underlying, then outward creativity may not even touch them, and they may carry on and evolve, despite anything that we tend to do, and they will surface in all kinds of ways in our life. And so that's why I think after all these years, lots of people who've spent lots of time and lots of money on creativity, the outward form of what I'm now going to call a different word in a moment, is that we can end up back where we started, not moved on, and even in a worse position. And some parts of the world have the outward word creativity. In other countries, creativitate is one version I've heard of it in the more Germanic countries, is that there is another underlying process that I think you see actually in children almost from the moment that they are born, and it's creativeness. And creativeness is a quality that's not so easy to pin down, not so easy to define. If creativity is the outward practice sometimes of creativeness are the underlying processes that occur in us in mysterious ways. And sometimes they've been defined through our writing, through our art, through our just contemplation of ourselves and our acceptance that we can't always put our creativeness into exact words and an outward form of certain tools and techniques. And those creativity-based tools and techniques are, if anything, a very, very rough attempt that will never be anything more than an approximation of what those processes that take place inside of us might be. Now, you might call them instinct, you might call them intuition, and you might call them imagination in a sort of inner sense of having an inner vision of who we are. They're inconvenient because they don't conform easily to problem-solving methodologies and framing things as if I do this, then that will happen, and here are my 3 options and I will prioritise. Now, encountering our own mystery and trying to work out who we are takes us into the places that can range anything from depression to fear to excitement to craziness to just being in a kind of neutral zone that can be as bad as the gutter and as good as just a place of expectation, of hoping, of exploring, of being open. We can open space for creativeness in different ways, simply through inquiring into the world and through waiting patiently for things to reveal themselves. I think creativeness is more sometimes about waiting, and sometimes it's about adventurous grabbing for things and seeing what happens. It's certainly about a kind of improvisational state that we can be in. And occasionally as well, it can be a very instinctive grasp for a technique and a trying it out, but being equally prepared to drop it and to take a how-to problem statement, throw it up in the air and watch it smash into the field of possibility. Creativity as the outward practice of creativeness is probably where we can be most integrated, because the tools and techniques that we then use don't often come from a rational place, but they come from a more improvisational, experimental place. And then we use brainstorming very, very differently, because we don't use it as part of a fixed process. Suddenly it comes up as something we might want to do, and we pull out a piece of paper almost furiously, and we write down every idea we can think about, a bit like a diary entry at the end of the day, where suddenly the pen seems to fly across the paper, almost out of our control, and we go into a flow state that hasn't come from our willful decision to do it rationally, but it's almost taken us over. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking I'm a bit crazy, you may never have experienced your creativeness outwardly, because you are actually in a day-to-day routine of creativity. And you may not even be in a place of creativity, but your rational day may have been defined by your organisation or by habit, where you're not even using creative tools and techniques. That can take you into a kind of wilderness, a kind of place of real deep satisfaction, as your instinct tells you that the big part of your potential, your own inner creativeness, is not finding a form, even in creativity. And that's when you can find on LinkedIn and other social media platforms and in other media that you can find the top 10 creative techniques and try this. And then what happens is that you start getting a kind of buzz of creativeness that could be good for you, but could also be a kind of white elephant. It takes you down a blind alley where you're simply applying outward creativity to surface problems, or trying to scratch at a much, much deeper level and finding that deep down there, it doesn't respond well to the surface tools and techniques. So what's to be done about that? Well, one way is, if you're practicing lots of outward creativity, is to actually risk going into your neutral zone, going into a kind of creative wilderness where you actually stop doing all of this outward creativity and just risk the silence. Now, the paradoxical danger is that you then say, I'll risk the silence and I'm going to do a mindfulness course, or I'm going to go and do some meditation, and the very doing of it turns it into an outward technique. This is much harder to achieve in some ways because it involves undoing the habit, the very habit that you've been trying to use to try and solve your problems. Other ways to deal with this is just to be silent. It's just to let go a bit. Nature can be a good place to do that, but so can a noisy underground train. It's a place of non-judgment, but you have to do it gently. You have to sort of wait patiently for that silence to come. You can't force it. There won't be a room full of people sitting in various postures of meditation and mindfulness that will achieve that if you're coming from the wrong place. There are other ways of doing it gently, which is just going into a kind of playfulness where you just give yourself permission to go where your energy is. Now, all of these things will undo, but also challenge your wish to know what's coming next, to be predictable, to frame life in a problem-solving mode. Definitely playfulness. Definitely a sort of gentle letting go. Certainly a place of, I sometimes call it rational madness, where you paradoxically are still in the practical world, but you allow crazy thoughts to come through. You just practice the opposite point of view for the hell of it. You just enjoy doing things that you wouldn't normally do, but you don't do that too rationally. Follow your feet. Do a kind of random act sometimes of just saying, I wouldn't normally walk into that shop. I wouldn't normally walk down that road. I'll just go and just float along it, kind of cruise along it rather than march along it with a purpose in mind, wanting to know what happens next. So accessing creativeness is kind of accepting there may be a muse of deep down inside you that you haven't been in touch with, and you have to invite it in. You can't force it in, even though it's part of you. So here's the final paradox, that to be more truly creative and to look back on life and say you're glad that you did this despite some of the mistakes, that the curve seems upwards, you might have to ditch problem-solving mode. You might have to go into creativeness as a kind of act of gentle surrender, and creativity might be standing in the way.